1953 is the year that Earl Warren became the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and 16 years of a court defined by its liberalism and activism followed close behind it. When Nixon was elected president, Earl Warren had announced his retirement, and Warren Burger was appointed by Nixon to take the place of Chief Justice. This was in large part due to Nixon's belief that Burger's conservatism and law and order reputation would put an end to the liberal trend that the Warren Court was following. Burger fought for many things during his time on the Supreme Court and made additional impactful decisions during his lifetime. Warren Burger should be in the APUSH Hall of Fame because of his work in expanding and defining amendment rights, particularly the freedoms in the First Amendment, and making changes that greatly benefited the U.S. judicial system. Let's begin with a little background information. Warren E. Burger was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1907 and attended college at what is now known as the Mitchell Hamline School of Law. He was an assistant attorney general for the Civil Division of the Justice Department and a judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit before being sworn in as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1969. Only a couple years after he was sworn in, the 1973 case of Roe v. Wade came before the Burger Court. Abortion was a divisive subject for many Americans in the 20th century, and due to his conservatism, Burger was expected to side with the judges who wanted to keep laws that prohibited abortion. However, he voted and fought with the majority in Roe v. Wade, and aided in getting the decision that resulted from it. The results of the case redefined privacy rights, and additionally gave women added protection over their bodies, but the outcome was, and still remains, largely controversial. And during his time on the court, Burger was also fiercely protective of freedom of the press, and sought to ensure that the press was able to exercise their rights without prohibition. In the case Nebraska Press Association v. Stewart, for example, the court dealt with whether or not an order restraining the press from releasing confessions made during a murder trial was constitutional. Burger was described to have written passionately against the order, claiming that, quote, a whole community cannot be restrained from discussing a subject intimately affecting life within it, end quote. The result of the case was that the restraint was unconstitutional. Burger additionally helped define the right of federal courts to remedy segregation in the Swan v. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education case. When this case came to the court, Brown v. Board of Education had already been decided. However, many schools had remained segregated, in part due to segregated housing patterns and resistance from local leaders. Burger ruled in favor of the courts having a wide scope when it came to addressing violations of mandates that aided in desegregation, and advocated for integration by busing. Burger also had a part to play in the Watergate scandal. Although he was appointed by Nixon, Burger helped force Nixon to turn over the Watergate tapes in the U.S. v. Nixon case. When the Supreme Court was called on to take action, Burger voted in agreement with the notion that Nixon's right to keep certain information safeguarded wasn't unlimited, and that he wasn't exempt from the power of subpoenas. The case result defined limits to executive privilege and caused Nixon to resign. Now that we've thoroughly discussed the ways in which Burger protected, expanded, and defined different rights in the U.S., let's move on to how he benefited the judiciary system. Burger was a vital advocate for the creation of the Alternate Dispute Resolution, or ADR. ADR is composed of methods for resolving disputes without litigation. It's advantageous for Americans because the methods are significantly less expensive than litigation, largely flexible, and allow people to avoid the uncertainty of traditional litigation. It's additionally advantageous to the judicial system in the sense that it helps prevent the system from being overburdened with cases. In addition to helping the court deal with a sometimes overwhelming influx of cases, Burger established a tool called the Lemon Test. The Lemon Test is a three-pronged test that can be used to determine whether given laws and actions violate the First Amendment, specifically the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. If a given law or action doesn't pass the Lemon Test, it can't be assisted by the government because the government would be establishing a religion. Burger created this test due to the court case of Lemon v. Kurtzman. The case brought to court the question of whether statutes giving funding for non-public, non-secular schools violates the First Amendment, and it was decided that a statute of that nature must pass the Lemon Test in order to be constitutional. The Lemon Test is still a helpful tool utilized by the court when determining constitutionality in cases concerning the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. After 17 years as Chief Justice, Burger retired from the court in 1986 and received a Presidential Medal of Freedom 2 years later. Warren E. Burger passed away in 1995, but his fight for Americans' rights and aid to the judicial system haven't been forgotten.